Hello, everyone. In August, I will be giving 10 online weekend lectures on Hinduism. These are introductory lectures and are open to anyone who is interested. Today, I'm going to give a taster lecture in which I will give you a taste of the style and the content of these 10 lectures. I will summarize the thematic contents of the first 5 lectures. Religious traditions across the world, such as Christianity, Islam, and others, are complex tapestries which are interwoven with polychrome threads relating to beliefs, practices, norms, and institutions, where these elements themselves are not stationary entities but have undergone various transformations across several millennia. If you are an outsider to Christianity, faithful Christians across the world might appear to you to be doing pretty much the same thing during Sunday church services. However, the moment you start asking some rather delicate questions regarding who they think Jesus Christ precisely is and how their universal Savior continues to act in the world 2 millennia after he lived in the Holy Land, you will be greeted with quite an astonishing range of answers. While one could argue that anyone who confesses Jesus as Lord is already a Christian, individuals in different historical contexts, social strata, and cultural milieux have received and continue to configure this lordship with distinctive variations. With the multitudinous systems of beliefs, practices, and norms that have come to be labeled Hinduism, the complexities are, in certain senses, even vaster. Focusing for a moment on the ISM in Hinduism, there is no universally binding set of creeds or beliefs or practices that applies to all individuals who claim to live, move, and have their being within its life form. Unlike the Jewish Shema O Israel, the Christian God is love, or the Muslim Shahada, it is not possible to isolate, extract, or distill from 3 millennia of South Asian social religious history one phrase or sentence that all those who call themselves Hindus can look at and declare, now that is what we all believe and live by in our lives. In these lectures, we have been exploring some of the dynamic complexities of Hinduism. Every time you look for one concept, thing, or process, you only seem to find more and more and more and more. And yet, you will see that notwithstanding the bewildering diversities encompassed by the term Hinduism, there are some overlapping ideas, practices, and institutions. Here is some scriptural background. Suppose you are a conceptual archaeologist. Instead of literally digging into the earth outside Jerusalem, you trace one Christian text from 1545 to another from 764, and then you locate this latter text in a yet more ancient one from 145 and so on. If you repeat this operation with social religious Hinduism, you would ultimately find your way back to the Vedas. Sometime around 1500 BCE, some individuals in and around the northwestern regions of India began to produce an orally transmitted collection of hymns, invocations to deities, parables, narratives, and so on, called the Vedas. From sometime around 800 BCE, another oral set of esoteric aphorisms, enigmatic statements, parables, allegories, dialogues, and so on began to be circulated within groups of gurus and their disciples, and these are called the Upanishads. The Vedas and the Upanishads do not always seem to speak with one voice. They are not systematic bodies of philosophical or theological thinking. Sometime between 200 BCE and 200 CE, there emerges a text called the Bhagavad Gita, which seeks to tie together the somewhat divergent strands of the Vedas and the Upanishads and give you their crystallized meaning. And finally, Sometime around 800 CE, a group of systematic theologians appear who claim to give you the distilled meaning of the Vedas, the Upanishads, and the Bhagavad Gita in one concise and precise formulation, and these conceptual universes are called Vedanta. Hinduism being what it is, you must not think that you have finally found the Holy Grail. Vedanta is not one system, and there are several competing Vedantic worldviews which claim to tell you what the Vedas, the Upanishads, and the Bhagavad Gita are really trying to teach you about the human self, God, and spiritual disciplines to attain God. From a strictly historical perspective, this is more or less how two broad religious traditions called Vaishnavism and Shaivism began to emerge sometime around the turn of the first millennium in South Asia. That is, some individuals began to produce texts which articulate the claim that their supreme god, Vishnu or Shiva, is the true significance, purport, and essence of the Vedas, the Upanishads, and the Bhagavad Gita. If you want to know what the Vedas, the Upanishads, and the Bhagavad Gita are really about, Vaishnavas will say to you, come to our Vaishnava temple and experience devotional love of Vishnu, the concrete form of the Vedas, the Upanishads, and the Bhagavad Gita. Some Vaishnavas will add the Bhagavata Purana to this list. Shaivas will make an analogous claim about Shiva. Before we proceed, one comment about the phrase from a strictly historical perspective. Vaishnavas and Shaivas who accept this historical account will claim, however, that their religious scriptures are not merely human products, which can be given specific dates such as 200 BCE or 900 CE, but are inspired by or uttered by Vishnu or Shiva. A motive central to the Vedas and texts called the Brahmanas is that the universe is produced through a primordial sacrifice. And all the forms of order, structure, and harmony that we perceive in the world around us are direct ongoing emanations from that cosmic event. Crucially, we and the order are not two neatly separable entities. Just as the order comprises us, we maintain that very order. If you were asked today, how is it possible that the sun rose this morning even when you were sleeping soundly and you had not offered any sacrifice to the dawn, you would probably reply, have you not heard of Newtonian celestial mechanics? Less enigmatically, the rising and the setting of the sun have nothing to do, or so you are claiming, with our conscious intentions, agential powers, and effective responses. The sun is just a dead mass of plasma, and we are living beings. Between the two lies fixed a wide gulf. However, this is not quite how things stand in the Vedic mythic imagination, because the regular motions of the celestial bodies are part of the intricate order generated by the cosmic sacrifice. If the sacrifice is not regularly repeated by human priests on Earth, the solar system and much else besides would gradually undergo an acute depletion of power over time. Just as we depend on the world at large for our sustenance, the world at large depends on us for its sustenance. A very, shall we say, organic way of situating humanity in the cosmos. Note the words we and the world at large. By the time of the Upanishads, two main questions are raised. Who or what is really the I? And what is really the world at large? And the answers go roughly as follows. The real I is not the psychophysical organism giving the talk, but the spiritual Atman, the deep self, the transcendental self, which is the immortal core of the human individual. What makes you you across the 24 hours in a day and the years of your life is not the physical body, not your contemplative thoughts, not your passionate emotions. All these are transient phenomena. You need a solid rock on which you can ground your existence and around which you can weave your thoughts, emotions, and passions into a coherent whole. And that foundation is right here in you, namely the Atman. Next, the real world at large is not the sun and the moon, the stars and the galaxies, the trees and the vegetation, the dogs and the cats. All these again are impermanent entities. You need an eternal foundation on which to ground the passing existences of the world. If absolutely everything were changing at the same time in a radical flux, you would not even be able to see anything or identify anything. The Upanishads declare that there is an eternal, indivisible, and immutable that, namely Brahman, which remains forever unchanged, even when everything else is changing. That is to say, in a world of rapid change, Brahman is the still point, which is the cosmic spiritual center of gravity. Everything moves because Brahman remains at their base as the unmoved mover. So then we get two concepts of Atman and Brahman, or is it really two concepts that we are dealing with here? To repeat what I said earlier, crucially, we and the order are not two neatly separable entities, just as the order comprises us. We maintain that very order. If that is so, we should speak in tongue twisting fashion of Atman, which is in Brahman, and Brahman, which is in Atman. This deep interrelationality between Atman and Brahman becomes even more pronounced during the time of the composition of the Upanishads, which often allegorize the external Vedic sacrificial ritual by offering spiritual meanings. Around the time of the Upanishads, we encounter a few other concepts such as samsara, karma, and moksha. These are the basic cogs of the Vedāntic cosmological machine, and I offer a description which would be acceptable across the Vedāntic schools. So long as you do not realize through deep spiritual insight or through intense devotional love the esoteric relationship between Atman and Brahman, you are in a state of ignorance, avidya. And in that state, the actions or karma which you perform generate negative residues. Because of these traces, the essential you, that is Atman, will continue to be reincarnated in multiple worlds, samsara. As you gradually become able to apprehend through deep spiritual insight or through intense devotional love, this relationship between Atman and Brahman, your karmic stream begins to lose its momentum and you move in the direction of liberation, moksha. Effectively, this is what some of the Upanishads are claiming about Vedic ritual dynamics. The Vedic ritual fires please the deities and produce this worldly goods such as cattle, longevity, and so on. However, by becoming entangled in these ritual transactions, you only become more densely implicated in karmic circuits. What you really need is to break through the karmic cycle, and we, the Upanishads, can show you the way, the life, and the truth. Here is an analogy to understand the relation between karma and moksha. In your financial life, you rightly wish to avoid an overdraft. That is to say, a transaction which brings your account into a negative balance. Now, add to this analysis of your financial health the somewhat puzzling thought. You wish to avoid even a positive balance, for such a figure will only fill your head with all kinds of concerns about how to spend your money, on whom or what to spend your money, how to invest your money, and so on. Just try to be like the birds of the air and the lilies of the field. If you get some money this morning, well and good, use it. And if you don't get any money, that is just as well too. For everything is from God and everything is taken away by God. Now, if You can live in the world with such an inner sense of detachment where your bank balance is neither positive nor negative, but consistently remains at zero. That zero is not a blank absence, but the rich fullness of abundant life in which you begin to move towards liberation. Be that as it may, here is a cosmos-sized problem for you. The universe in Hindu mythic accounts is without a beginning, anadi, and it moves through cosmological cycles of mind-bogglingly immense durations. What this means is that we have already accumulated gigantically vast amounts of karmic deserts across times without beginning, and in this lifetime we are again accumulating karmic deserts. And these deposits pull us to the world and prevent us from ascending to moksha. How do we bring this karmic quantity to zero? The question is, given that we are in samsara because of our karmic baggage, and we seem to be prodigiously accumulating even more of such a baggage in the present lifetime, how do we shake it all off, which is the holy zero, and rise to liberation? Before we look at two distinct ways of addressing this question, we need to indicate one more theme, the hermeneutics of Vedanta. Suppose you have never studied the Upanishads and you are given the somewhat daunting task one morning. Go and read the 11 principal Upanishads in the library and answer this question: what is the relationship between Atman and Brahman? You assiduously read through these texts for a month. The experience is both frustrating and exhilarating. After 1 month, this is what you have to report. I can't quite figure out what the Upanishads are saying about the relationship between Atman and Brahman. All I have found are some allegories. The relation between Atman and Brahman is like that between a fire and its sparks. The relation between Atman and Brahman is like that between the multiple rivers and the one ocean into which they flow. The relation between Atman and Brahman is like that between the hub of a wheel and its spokes. The problem you have encountered is more or less the exegetical challenge for philosophers who develop styles of Vedāntic readings of the Vedas, the Upanishads, and the Bhagavad Gita. Towards solving such ancient Hindu puzzles, consider the following two sentences. Number one, water is H2O. Number two, Charles Dickens is an Englishman. In one, H2O is not a quality or attribute or description of water. Whatever water is essentially H2O. In two, however, we would like to think that being an Englishman is not utterly essential to being Charles Dickens. If Charles Dickens were Welsh, he might still have done a pretty good job of writing novels about young children in Victorian industrial towns. Therefore, Englishman is not the essential mark of Charles Dickens. It is an attribute or a quality or a description which depends on his existence. And now, look at the sentence, the Atman is Brahman. How would you or should you read the IS here? Texts such as the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita do not give you an unequivocal and unambiguous answer to this question. I will cut through an enormous amount of philosophical and theological literature to summarize their answers under two labels, V1 and V2. V1, the Atman is Brahman in the same sense that water is H2O. There is nothing more to Brahman than what the Atman is, and there is nothing more to Atman than what Brahman is. Here is an example from astronomy. There is nothing more to the evening star than what there is to the morning star, and there is nothing more to the morning star than what there is to the evening star. For both these descriptions, namely evening star and morning star, refer to one and the same entity called Venus. V2, the Atman is Brahman in the same sense that Charles Dickens is an Englishman. Being an Englishman does not exhaust the being of Charles Dickens. There is more to Charles Dickens than his English socio-political identity. Likewise, there is more to Brahman than what the Atman is. Very roughly, you can translate Atman as the inner self or finite soul, and Brahman as the supreme god or goddess, who is Vishnu or Shiva or Kali. With all this conceptual background, we are ready to look at three principal ways of answering the question. V1 plus world renunciation. The world is constituted of karma, and the world is perpetuated by karma. If you want to rise above the world, abandon it absolutely and take to the wild paths under the open skies. Become a wandering ascetic, sannyasi. You are then at home wherever you may be in the world. Your only companion is Atman Brahman, and therein lies your liberation. Turn your back to the world. You are as spontaneous as the wind which blows where it wills. In fact, you are the homeless and thus utterly free wind. If your finite consciousness thus becomes entirely suffused with, pervaded by, and rooted in the ever-present realization of Atman Brahman, your karmic residues will fall away from you. In the depths of the cave of your heart, you will find the imperishable rock of the ages. That is your sacred zero. The world simply passes through you, for you offer no impedance to its passage through you. You are a transparent crystal through which the worldly light shines, and yet you are not touched in any way by that worldly light. V2 plus world affirmation. The world is constituted of karma, and the world is perpetuated by karma. If you want to rise above the world, you do not have to abandon it in the physical sense of migrating to distant mountains or hermitages. You can be in the world even though you are not of the world. You are like the beautiful lotus plant that grows out of the mud and yet is not contaminated by the dirt. Everything that you say, do, and think, you should lovingly offer them to Vishnu or Shiva or the goddess, who is the supreme agent in your existence. It is not you who act, but the divine reality who acts in, with, and through you. Such karmic actions do not bind you to the world. That is your sacred zero. V1 plus world affirmation. The world is constituted of karma, and the world is perpetuated by karma. However, to attain moksha, you need not undertake arduous pilgrimages to remote mountainous caves. The Atman Brahman you seek is not any more up there in the Himalayas than down here in the heat and dust of everyday life. Indeed, it is in and through the mundane that you must discover the transcendental, for the earthly and the spiritual are not mutually opposed but deeply intertwined. Therefore, it is through service to humanity and an active form of life in the world that you rise up to the Atman Brahman which is in you. The realization that the Atman Brahman is expressed through the everyday world and the everyday world is grounded in the Atman Brahman is the holy zero. Let us summarize our discussion. Here and now, in the heat and dust of everyday living, our existences are shaped by karmic processes which we are fueling through our mundane activities. And here and now is also the Atman Brahman, the eternal God at hand and the indivisible God in us, in which or in whom we should seek to become rooted in, pervaded by, and suffused with in every conscious and subconscious moment of our lives. That point of intersection between the finite and the infinite, the home and the world, the temporal and the eternal, the householder and the hermit, the here now and the eternal now, and Atman and Brahman has been the quest of Hindu socio-religious existence for 3 millennia.